Do you spend a ton of time training your SDRs only to find that they make the same mistake over and over again, take months to ramp, and have trouble making quota? Yoda AI by RingDNA delivers AI-powered conversation guidance so that every rep can sell like your top performer. In real time, deliver talking points that help reps overcome sales objections, stay on message, and beat the competition. You'll never have to endlessly repeat sales advice to reps again. It's easy to set up, easy to customize, and comes with out-of-the-box coaching best practices. Turn your team into a revenue-driving machine today with Yoda AI by RingDNA. To learn more, visit ringdna.com/Yoda. That's ringdna.com/YODA.
Very few people have coached the coaches before in most organizations. Even today, a lot of coaches or a manager maybe, they may be the manager because they were the best seller before. And even though we think that's an old adage, we see that all the time in the enterprise where the best seller became the manager and they had a couple hours of management training on some type of CMS platform. And then I said, great, you got this team of 8 people, go do it. Have them all hit quota, like you said. And they've got to have a better system to engage and pull the productivity forward for their team.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Brian Trautschold. He's the co-founder and COO at Ambition. And we cover a lot of territory in this conversation. Brian shares his perspectives about the role of gamification on the sales floor, or the virtual sales floor. And we dive into how B2B sales is changing and whether it's changing fast enough. Meaning, is B2B sales changing as fast as B2B buyers are changing how they want to buy? We also dig into managing for performance. It's really a critical issue for sales leaders today, and not one that most sales bosses are enabled to perform. As I said, we cover a lot of ground in this conversation. Make sure you stick around for everything. And before we get to Brian, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Brian, welcome to the show.
Andy, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing well. Yeah, it's great to connect with you today.
Yeah, we finally made this happen. I think this is our 4th or 5th attempt. We had various
comedy of errors and rescheduling.
Right.
Here we are.
Here we are. We persisted, and here we are. Hallmark of good salespeople: persistence. Right. All right. So, for people who aren't familiar with Ambition, the company, tell us what you do.
Yeah, Ambition is a sales coaching and gamification platform. We help, we think, some of the most forward-thinking and world-leading sales teams get more productivity, higher level performance, and have more successful coaching and development of their sales reps.
Got it. But you started with the gamification. I mean,
that's right.
So I'm curious about that, and because sales is competitive enough as it is. I mean, what sort of is the purpose of layering more competition onto it?
Yeah, well, I think salespeople are probably naturally competitive, as you said. I agree with you in most cases. But there's, sales is probably one of the most obvious areas where having a really strong set of incentives, whether they be continual, as well as maybe disincentives, is very helpful. It's a very numbers-driven profession. The truth is in the data. And I think what we're seeing as organizations get a little bit more sophisticated is they want to have a really robust set of feedback loops. And those feedback loops are driving toward all of the things that make a healthy and effective sales process. And so the gamification, you had a great point, and not to drag this out too long, but traditionally, most people say, well, I have a great incentive. It's commission. And I have a commission plan. And if I make the commission plan great, when people hit quota, they're going to be thrilled. And what we found is that in the modern sales environment, you need more than that. You have to kind of incentivize and refocus and create really powerful feedback loops to every aspect of it, whether it's prospecting, creating pipeline, moving a prospect or an opportunity through the pipeline, and then still closing at a high rate of success. So we add more in there, I think.
Yeah, so let me dive into that a little bit. So you said in the modern sales environment. So
Sure.
Modern how?
I think it's a mentality and a philosophy. 4 years ago, maybe, if we were talking to a Fortune 500 company and we said, how do you make sure that your people are productive and effective? They would tell us, did they hit quota or not? We're going to check that number once, maybe twice per year, and that's all we need to measure and have an effective sales team. Now people really think about that funnel and kind of this consistent cadence and feedback loop of how sellers operate. And everything that you do today is a leading indicator to lagging indicators that may be achieved a month from now or a quarter from now. And that sophistication and that kind of modern thinking, we've seen change a lot in the last, like I said, 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, okay. I mean, I look at my own experience. It goes back, 40 plus years in sales, and yeah, I mean, we had sales boards, we had contests, all the time. I'm just wondering, and I want to get into this more later because I don't like this whole sort of what I consider conceit of what modern sales is because this is really nothing new. I'm not sure why we equate that with sophisticated sales teams. It's just like maybe these are people that are paying attention and better managed, but I don't see where the modern part comes in.
Yeah, maybe it's an arbitrary word, but we think there's a pretty drastic philosophical difference between people who are waiting to see the results at the end of a year versus people who are trying to create really impactful feedback loops throughout the entire course of that funnel, and even on the demand gen side of the funnel, so that as data comes in, you're not just looking at the information in the rear view and assessing where we've been and how we got here, but you're actively course correcting, you're actively participating in how do you steer us to where we want to be in a kind of continually updated direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the context that you use the word, what does, in your mind, what does productivity mean in sales?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, are you doing the activities that lead to the effects that you want or the objectives that you want, and then have ultimately, if you're doing the right activities, if you have kind of clear objectives of what those activities will deliver, and you're operating at a high enough conversion rate for those things, you're going to reach the results you want. And so it's a very, once again, systematic approach to, getting from day one of a quarter or a period and saying, I want Andy to close $1 million. You're doing all, yeah, right. That's what they used to say. Well, cool. We'll pay you 10% of whatever you close, and like.
Well, they never said that. I can tell you. I can guarantee you that.
Now we see that all becoming much more formulaic, and then and with that formula, you're able to do better adjustments, course correcting, coaching on all those conversion rates. So you have a highly productive sales team, and maybe like the last part about that, or part of that we see as key, is that the efficacy and the how well you are at maximizing the talent on your team is really critical right now. I don't know if it's more critical than ever. That may be a far statement, but making sure that you're getting the maximum results of the talent that you're investing in, that's the productivity goal that we're delivering for our customers.
Okay. I mean, I look at productivity different. I wish that in sales we looked at productivity in the same way that, well, I mean, we're some people would say that we're trying to turn sales floors into assembly lines, but shouldn't we look at productivity the way economists define it as a rate of output per unit of investment or input? So for me, real productivity in sales is how many dollars of revenue am I generating per hour of sales time?
Sure.
And it's not activity driven. It's hey, to your point, what are you producing? Right. I give people the example. I said, if you have a factory and it's I don't know, making truck axles or something, and they manufacture 100 truck axles per hour, but 20 of them have to be reworked before they can go forward. What's their production rate? And it's 80 per hour. It's not 100 per hour. But we look in sales. Somebody's making 50 calls. That's their productivity. And it's like, well, yeah, but why don't we measure on the part of their activities that actually lead to an outcome?
Sure. I think we're probably saying the same thing in maybe slightly different ways, but that is what, if you don't have a great assessment and a great handle on the leading indicators like calls or conversations that have a positive disposition and move on to opportunity creation and opportunities that move forward and not just end up being stuck, it's very difficult to tweak that. You want to break the process in our mind. You want to break the process into as many conversion points or kind of areas where you can increase the leverage. How can you make every one of those conversion points more effective? So you have to have consistency, throughout the process. Maybe it's not that you want to treat people like an assembly line, but you do want to create enough standardization or segmentation across different parts of your selling org that may have slightly different approaches or customer type, that everyone understands the things they need to be doing per hour or per day or per month, and then have a baseline or maybe targeted achievable rate of conversion that ends up with that productivity or production level that you're describing. And so I think a lot of times, if you start with the end result, which is X dollars of quota, converted or closed won, and you go backwards based on clear set of objectives, clear set of conversion rates, then you can get into those leading productivity, the data on the leading productivity measures that can be coached to, managed to, you can engage people on, you can communicate with on a day-to-day basis. And I'll break that one more level, because I think this got a great phenomenon happening in the work from home or remote world era we're in right now, where everyone wants a Peloton now, or everyone is really checking their Apple Watch or their Garmin of how active they've been. It's like if I told you, that I want to lose 20 pounds, and if I just said, hey, I'm going to lose 20 pounds by the end of March 31st, and I weighed myself today, and I weighed myself, and I did some things that I thought were going to work, but I weighed myself at the end of March 31st. If I'm not checking my progress or keeping track of the things that are going to impact me losing those 20 pounds day in, day out, or week in, week out, some type of, digestible time frame, it's probably really difficult for me to actually achieve that goal. And I think that's the mentality we've seen be applied to sales leadership and kind of sales philosophies in the last few years, which is how do we break the goal and how do we break the target into the most digestible, attainable things on a shorter term basis that will lead to the successful outcome that we want.
Yeah, I mean, in there, and this is, so I'll go back to my other point is someone who's grown and scaled companies is like, been doing it for decades. It's like, well, of course, this is what you do, right? You don't, it'd be a fool as a manager or as a sales leader to only check people's progress, at the beginning and the end of a period, as opposed to daily, when you're dealing with people.
You're the right type of customer then. That's good.
Well, but I think it speaks to a point, which is that the issue really is, it seems like what you're trying to compensate for is just poor sales leadership. The way you're describing it is like, hey, we got people coming in, they're doing sort of, hey, we assign goals, we'll check with you in 90 days. yeah, we know that's apocryphal to a little bit degree, but hey, if people really thought that was, and we know people gravitate to a lot of the new tools that we have available for sellers and sales teams because they have this data, but what are they doing with this data to actually make people, to your point, more effective in those moments when they're in front of customers? Because that's what it's all about, right? I mean, it's and I to me, the situation described is a real problem with sales leadership and I think it still exists, is just inattentive.
Yeah, I think inattentive may be a great word for it. I also think that got a lot of organizations where even if the philosophy is right that you're describing, and maybe the philosophy's been right for 50 years, you had big gaps in where that knowledge, where that information was, and was it able to be channeled into insights or actionable information in a time that's useful. And so I think a lot of this also, and what Ambition solves for our customers, is that we're getting the right data to the right people at the right time. And if you do that, then they can take action. Then they can coach people differently. They can assess that someone's off course and that they need to adjust the plan, adjust the productivity or their level of productivity. And a lot of times, as recently as now, we get into customers and we talk to a sales manager or a sales team lead, and whether they believe the things that you described, they may not have the tool set or the infrastructure to actually act on those things or even receive the information to act on it. And that is all, I think, part of what we're going to see is that data driven is going to be in everything. As you talk about sports, you talk about companies, anything, sales may have been something where we thought we applied to a lot of data to before, but I think we're still in an early inning of that truly being applied to the profession in a way that really impacts sellers and seller success.
Yeah, well, I think it's the people who are the sales leaders who are good anyway will gravitate to this and use it to become even better. But still, the broadest swath of sales leadership is not going to take advantage of it. And I think this is sort of a bigger issue, which is, we've got great tools like Ambition. Is how do we train and coach sales leaders, sales bosses as a category to become better and to use tools like this to become better. And part of it starts with just their perspective of what their jobs are and what they need to get accomplished. Because it's a wonderful opportunity. But I think, like so many things, it's like, get these great new technologies come into sales. The people that take best advantage of it are those that are the leading ones anyway.
We certainly think so.
So how do we broaden the scope of this? Because my belief is, and this is based on just random data points, and there hasn't been any study done on this, but this idea of productivity, as I talked about before, is in terms of dollars of revenue produced per selling hour by a salesperson. I don't think that's gotten any better. In fact, if you look at general productivity trends within the economy at large, it's reasonable to make the assertion that sales productivity hasn't increased in the last 20 to 30 years. And yet at the same time, when we've had all this incredible influx of great, interesting, innovative technologies into the sales space, it's like, what's the part we're missing?
Yeah, it's an interesting angle to take. I think it's difficult to, it'd be interesting to try to have an apples to apples comparison there, because I think what you have is, just look at our industries. We're both in SaaS companies. We sell into, sales enablement space at large. There's more sellers than ever. I would venture.
Yeah, reasonable assumption, I think, based on sales hiring over the last 10 years.
If you look at the amount of money spent in our category, it's never been higher, vastly. It's growing rapidly. How much money is being spent in categories that didn't even exist a few years ago. So I think there's.
But it's having an impact. That was sort of the point, right? And the reason I was looking at sort of, and I
Just look at a simple company like a Salesforce. Like, certainly, if CRM, which is maybe the foundation of the category, if it weren't having an impact on seller productivity, or maybe you could say that there's different impacts that it has to the organization. There's certainly data reporting, visibility, impact. There's things that are kind of pretty wide ranging, but the scale at which there are now multiple companies in
sure.
that category that create billions of dollars of revenue every year, I would say there's some level of productivity increase.
Yeah. I don't know that I necessarily go that far, but because why would sales be any different than the broader economy in terms of productivity growth? Yeah, and so since the fascinating article, Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winner in economics, wrote about, I don't know, in the fall, but basically it was showing that technology had a huge impact in individual personal productivity, in the corporate world, like up till 2000. And then since then, the rate of productivity growth has been flat based on investment in technologies and so on. I think it's like 1.2%. And the assumption was sort of there was that, well, the things that really drove productivity growth, technology that drove productivity growth were personal computing, the internet, and I forget the third one. Oh, email were the three things that drove productivity. But beyond that, we haven't seen that same gain from. And so this, I think, is just an interesting challenge for us as an industry that are selling these tools. Is as a lot of times technology adoption is driven more by we can do these things rather than we should do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And they're out there. It's just my gut feel, and I'm perfectly open to say it's just gut feel based on various data points. It's like, we're not moving the needle on that. For me, what is the most important thing, which is, how do we make that person, the seller, individual seller, more productive in those moments when they're face to face with the prospect? And there's a way that we can track that that's happening. Because, we look at the other data points that exist, CSO Insights, all these reports, sales rep quota attainment's down, blah, blah, no decision rates are up, all these things that just say, well, hey, maybe we're not really finding the key yet with this.
Sure. I think that maybe that's a tool to tool or product category to category distinction. And I'm sure you could paint it broadly across, but when we talk to a sales leader, in most cases they know the formula. They know the plan that they want people to run in, and that they want to maximize as much time and energy that a sales rep is dedicating to working the plan. We call it work the plan because the plan works.
Sure.
And so how do you reinforce and create positive feedback loops and attention cycles that make sure your people are dedicating as much time, energy to working the plan and doing those productive steps versus things that may be less productive. And we've seen, I think, a lot of tools come and go or become extremely hot and then become less so because, at the end of the day, they didn't obviously create those feedback loops or that positive virtuous cycle of value.
Well, let me ask you a question, and slightly off track, but it's related to something you're just saying, is working the plan and so on. Is the plan ultimately tied to a quota of some sort? Why are we still using quota? I mean, quota is a remnant. It's like piecework that people get paid in factory work, and it's been around forever, right? It's nothing modern about quota. In fact, there is research that shows that quota is actually counterproductive. It's this Goodhart's law. And Charles Goodhart, I believe, British economist back in the 60s, came up with this formulation, which, based on what I've read, has been proven out, which is that when a measure becomes a target, it loses all value as a measure because people optimize their processes to achieve the measure, the target. And so, like I said, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It has nothing to do with potential, right? If I assign a number to something, this is why I focus on this rate of revenue generation per hour, because that's not tied to trying to achieve a fixed target like a quota. So I see quotas antiquated. There's got to be better ways, including productivity, how I define it, and others, to measure sellers going forward that unlock actual productivity. I was wondering what you guys are hearing about that.
Yeah, Andy, that's interesting. I mean, it seems like maybe we should have done this podcast at, maybe like 8 p.m. Eastern and had a bourbon or something while we philosophized.
Who says I'm not drinking?
Let's do it. I don't know. It's maybe.
I'm not. It's 9 a.m. I'm not drinking, just so everybody knows.
But the philosophy part is really interesting. I do think that, we talk creating this systematic approach and kind of creating this repeating cycle or cyclical feeling within the organization where you are able to create visibility and identify the KPIs and the KPI expectations, create accountability to those things, direct change management and attention on them, whether that is very active or only by loose feedback. And then once you've done that a few times, you generate insights and you start back at the top with the visibility, and you just continue to run that cycle. And part of that is having the right. You're kind of, I think, talking about and maybe referencing, are you measuring what matters? And once you put a target on it and the energy goes towards a certain key activity or key metric, well, is it lost? I don't know. I think what's, if you looked at any, someone like a David Sachs or a, who's gotten some good content on this. I think Andy Grove has content on this kind of in the precursor to OKR. Like the foundation of a company and a business is, this series of layered upon objectives of different teams and different kind of operating groups within the organization. And, sales is part of that, demand generation is part of that, marketing. And I think it's very difficult to, in the current terms and those type of thinkers say, well, we're going to remove the idea of KPIs and targets and
different targets. Do we target differently? That's my point. Is that for reasons even as simple as Goodhart's laws, quota is just wrong. It suppresses total output as opposed to encouraging greater output, in my mind, and always has. And so, it becomes the hallmark of what we consider these, quote unquote, modern selling. And this is, sorry, me getting on my soapbox on this, but I was doing some research about sales processes for a book I'm writing, and I started comparing, when searched all these things online about hundreds of examples, what diagrams, what modern sales process looks like, all the stages and so on. And at the end, you lay them all out, and I just laugh because it's like, we were using those stages 40 years ago. What's modern about this? What do we apply a layer of technology to it that makes it modern? That we have KPIs around it? It's like, granted, it changes it, but we have to just, if we want to be modern about things, so we have to rethink all of this stuff. Because if we assume, it's just last point, as we assume, as I think is a safe assumption, is that the individual productivity or output of individual sellers has not as improved as a result of using all this technology compared to years before, then we're not using it right. We need to rethink everything instead of just, like I said, putting this veneer of technology on things that were done in the past. And it's it's like, let's start with quota, right? It's just has no purpose. Find another way to measure people. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I think it's still the reality of where we operate today. And so, I
Sure.
think it's interesting in the context of an ambition world or, our ecosystem. Ambition, we think about things in a different framework as well. So we want people to, start with the results they want. That could be
Mm-hmm.
quota attainment, that could be a variety of different metric-based goals, or even non-metric based. Start with those results.
Mm-hmm.
Moving one step backward, there's a series of objectives that leads to those results. And then, if you go back one step further, you have a myriad of activities on a shorter term time frame that are going to lead to those objectives. So, when we walk into an organization with whatever level of sophistication or, modern approach to how they think about leadership or employee experience or setting targets and goals, whatever it is, we're trying to impart that change so that they can clearly communicate and drive attention and consistency and then alignment throughout their entire organization of, we want these results from you, salesperson or sales person or customer success manager. To get those, we think at reasonable rates of conversion, you're going to have to hit these objectives on a, shorter term time frame. And then to do those, you're going to have to, execute these activities at some level of reasonable conversion and consistency. And so it creates, once again, like it ultimately, you have to be measuring what matters. You have to be you have to set, I think, some type of data, that you can validate that are the things that this group of people in your organization contributing. Is it having the intended? So, you call it whatever you want. We think of that as creating this kind of ongoing series of micro incentives and kind of micro attention opportunities to either get positive feedback or some type of reward or some type of opportunity for coaching and change.
Right.
And that snowballs. And once you have that snowballed across thousands of people in a sales organization, you can have a very highly effective organization that's operating very consistently.
Yeah, I agree. The question is it operating at peak productivity? And this is, I know we don't have enough time to go through into all that today, but this, I think, is something that it's forward thinking, right? But it's trying to encourage this conversation, and I know others are as well. It's just to really sort of come to grips with the reality of what sales is today and say, okay, we've been calling it these things, but it's really not. So what do we really need to do to prepare ourselves for a future that really measures the right things, that really does enable people to, on an individual level, improve their output in a meaningful way. So it's one thing, like, for instance, that sort of comes to mind is, because I focus a lot of my time and work and things I'm working on in sort of individual performance improvement, individual productivity enhancements. And we have this sort of, I think, collision happening in sales that's sort of been increasing over the last 10, 15 years, is that, as we talk more and more about systems, but we also, in the process of implementing those systems, we remove autonomy away from the individual. And I think, and sometimes then also by removing the autonomy away from the individual sellers, we sort of reduce their incentive to invest in their own development. And so we've got sort of this vicious cycle because, we've mechanized sales to a greater degree, and some of which is absolutely want to. But on the other hand, sales is still this individual performance sport, if you will, business sport. And we need to provide people the space to experiment and try new things and not be so driven by the same KPIs as everybody else. How do we in this context of structure, how do we give people this individual autonomy to improve?
Well, I think that we, focus on that a ton, and we live in that every day. And I think having clear visibility into those things, whatever we're kind of talking in very round terms around some of the metrics, but
Sure.
if you start talking about a, kind of classic SaaS, high velocity sales team, which, I'm sure dozens of Ring DNA customers have that, and certainly dozens of Ambition customers have that. They may look at, I think you're kind of speaking to the challenge of a lot of these folks they're trapped in their sequence or cadence or whatever it is, this thing that they do to do outbound and get in touch with prospects. And, maybe you're removing as you said, the autonomy or maybe someone would say the creativity and the variety of how people would approach that. Well, we look at that certainly too. And we say, your company or the director of whatever your role you're in, they've set this target. You need to call 50 people a day, or you need to have X number of conversations. I think that ultimately what we want to put as much of that information in front of the salesperson so that they can very directly have a clear understanding of how they're doing compared to their peers, how they're doing in terms of a pace to that target. There's an outcome to that thing. They don't want to make 50 calls a day just to make 50 calls a day. They figured out that, to talk to, 7 people a day, or maybe have 10 qualified conversations, you have to make that many calls. And so, there's still some building block of how creative someone can be and how do they make their part of that chain more effective, which we want to give them as much visibility to, customize that process as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We don't own the cadence tooling or the email, the email process. We just want to give them the most clear amount of data so that they can say, wow, I'm not on pace to set up as many opportunities as I want to be, or I'm not creating as much pipeline dollars as I, had goaled myself at. And it's just like, the weight loss thing. Like if I understand that I'm not doing it at the same rate, how do I adjust on the other side? How do I, course correct that through other means? And hopefully it's being creative and having autonomy and being enabled by their team to not just become an automaton, to be a really data-driven, savvy salesperson. And the last part of that thought is that a lot of times the manager, in this case, who we think of as a coach, most organizations, they're fairly ill-prepared to do that. They may not have enough real-time insights. They may not have enough visibility to the, kind of the windshield-facing indicators. And so we want to give them, we do give them, and we believe in having a very structured coaching process that highlights these areas of this or areas of strength, and then gives them a workflow to rely on. Because in a lot of cases, we see that coaching on those areas where there is autonomy and coaching on the areas where there is freedom of motion, if you will, that's where reps really can start to shine, because someone's in there with them, in a team setting, trying to improve those productivity rates or the effectiveness of those things.
Right. Yeah. No, I'd love to continue this conversation, and we'll have you back and we'll do it. Because one of my passions right now is, the pushing back against this idea that largely what we're engaged in is people toss around the term modern sales. And really, when it boils down to it, they're talking about is top of funnel activities, which granted have been transformed. But on the other hand, I'm one of many who don't really consider that selling at top of funnel. That's, lead gen and hugely important, but it's not anything that gets the order. So, I think we have to really look at in more serious fashion is what are we doing across the board? And I think what you talked about is great, is giving more insight to the individual as they go through their process to help them make better decisions about how to invest their time and to be more effective and productive in front of the customer. But there's much more I think that we have to do in that regard to really transform this and prepare sales for a future that's still going to be driven by humans, but it's going to be different. And I think I put more pressure, if you will, on the individual to become even more effective in those relatively few moments they have to be talking to a prospect and influence the choices and decisions they make.
Yeah, we think, as much as technology is going to enable it, and certainly it does in an ambition world where you've got, streams of data from really a limitless amount of systems, but typically multiple systems coming together to provide, the best visibility of a sales rep, both to their own pace to objectives and goals, but also to, their own performance in comparison to their peers.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting the same window of visibility to the manager or the coach. And, hopefully you have to and are able to, as an organization, see which coaching programs, what styles, what type of management cadence is having the highest impact on your seller's productivity, and then you're able to scale that. And so we think, not only do you get a huge increase of benefit from reps and salespeople, sellers, or whatever role is having visibility to these things, but also the coaches having that visibility, and then a sales leader having visibility into both sides, because very few people have coached the coaches before in most organizations. Even today, a lot of coaches or a manager they may be the manager because they were the best seller before. And even though we think that's an old adage, we see that all the time in the enterprise.
Sure.
Where, the best seller became the manager, and they had a couple hours of management training on some type of, some CMS platform, and then they said, "Great, you got this team of 8 people. Go do it. Have them all hit quota," like you said. And they've got to have a better system to engage and pull the productivity, forward for their team.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the point you made. It just speaks to so many issues. Is I think one of the disservices that in this, again, we have these sort of vicious cycles that we get into, is since companies in general woefully underinvest in the development of their frontline sales managers and sales leadership in general, and they presume, since they give these people a title, that suddenly become experts on performance improvement and motivation and mindset and all these things that that they don't know necessarily, right? Because they haven't been trained. Until companies get serious about investing at that level, in really a couple ways. One is they do a big disservice to a lot of sellers, top sellers, by promoting them instead of letting and counseling these sellers to say, look, this may not be the path for you, right? As you are a wonderful salesperson, you think you want to be a manager, but let's run somebody through a coaching program, an assessment program, or something, because I've seen no shortage of people who have been promoted, good sellers, promoted into management, who then struggle from a career perspective after that. Because they sometimes think, well, I'm a manager now. I need to get a sales management role. And they find it hard to go back to being a seller when they should never have been encouraged to be promoted in the first place. I think that's part of our coaching, is we have to give these top sellers a realistic view of what life is like as a manager, and say, hey, here's a career path as an individual contributor that can be hugely rewarding, depending on what you really want to get out of life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a honestly, like the pathing is something that we think about internally here a lot. And I think that it's a huge challenge for people's, even their personal career trajectory, and understanding, that it's okay to be in a role where you have a ton of upside and have the ability to control your productivity in a lot of ways and control the output. From a company standpoint of what we sell to, our buyers who are CROs or SVPs of sales or leaders of sales enablement, you've got to be able to create the system of record and scalable approach to coaching, to management, to having this cycle that takes what is happening, the data and the visibility of what's going on, hold people to, are you achieving what we expected? Can we create accountability to whether it's an activity metric or simply goals and objectives on the whatever time frame? Could it go all the way out to quota? Are you holding them accountable to it? Do you have levers that can change behavior? That's probably one of the biggest things that most people really struggle with, is even if they do identify the challenge, changing behavior is really hard. Changing people's habits is very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Getting people to buy into change. And so you have to have a very healthy, innovative, unique way of getting people's attention, capturing that attention and turning it into new habits. And then as you've got people doing new things, doing a new workflow, doing a new process, being better at the process, saying a different thing, whatever it is, can you glean the insights to get back to the start? And so, with ambition and kind of coming at it from the leadership angle,
mm-hmm.
That's why we're building a metric-based coaching platform. And that's why we've created a system of record with timelines to all of the interaction between a manager and a rep and how they've achieved different goals, incentives, different path as they've gone from whatever role they came in at, with whatever metrics it had, to where they are today and where they expect to go.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Yeah, we could have a whole other conversation just on the coaching aspect, which I love to do. It's you're in the sweet spot because, as you've identified, this is a weakness in the system generally, right? And this is nothing new. Existed forever. Sales managers are expected to perform in a certain way and aren't enabled either from a training and development standpoint or necessarily from a tool standpoint to do it. And it is the single most important thing that drives individual performance improvement is effective coaching.
There we agree 100%. And it's really interesting, like the system, when I say the system, like it's a monolith, it's not a monolith, but if you look at the mass majority of people that your team or our team will run into, it's, they're using Salesforce or similar. They've got a certain set of enablement tools around that, which is great. Like you pointed out, they may have a myriad of systems that should be impacting them. But even if you look at Salesforce specifically, Salesforce is built to navigate from the customer side. It's all built around the lead to an opportunity or an account. And even the nomenclature is all about the customer. And it takes a hard pivot on that data to make it about the rep or the individual seller within the organization. And I think that's one of the areas that we stumbled into very early doing gamification. And, once we found that we had, a huge amount of green space around that, which we feel can strongly impact the success of those sellers and ultimately the success of the organization, that's been a fascinating journey of really, digging in and investing in tools and, tools and insights around how do you get the most out of these people.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about it. So, Brian, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I think, obviously ambition.com would be a great place to get in touch with us as the company. LinkedIn, you can find me. I'd love to hear from you. Brian Trautschold, just search for me on LinkedIn. I think there's only one in the world. And then, if you ever want like really hot takes on, SaaS companies and founding companies or maybe the NBA, then you can follow me on Twitter. I'm B Trautschold there.
The NBA.
I'm kind of a stats nerd, data nerd.
Who's your team?
The Memphis Grizzlies are my team, which was where I grew up.
Got it. And how are they doing this year?
Right now, Andy, they're doing pretty well. They're in the playoff hunt, which is better than expected. They're overachieving. If we had to,
well, that's good. All right, Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciate it, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to listen. We are ever so grateful for your support of this podcast. And I want to thank my guest, Brian Trautschold, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or a review and let us know how we're doing, we'd certainly appreciate that. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Ever wish you could coach like you've listened to every sales call without actually having to listen to every sales call? Conversation AI from RingDNA uses the power of artificial intelligence to help busy sales managers know exactly where to focus their coaching efforts. Learn which talking points are working and which are falling flat, ramp new reps faster, and help your entire team master the art of conversation. Unlock your team's full potential with the power of AI. Learn more at ringdna.com/CAI. That's ringdna.com/CAI.